They shake your hand. They look you in the eye. They make promises that sound like sacred vows. And then they shatter every word without blinking. You call it betrayal. But to those who understand power, it's just Tuesday. Because here's what nobody wants to tell you about the people who rule your world. Promises aren't bonds. They're weapons. And the moment you believe otherwise, you've already lost the game. Niccolo Machiavelli didn't write about politics. He wrote about survival. And in his cold, surgical analysis of power, he revealed the most uncomfortable truth in human history. The good don't rise, the honest don't rule. And those who keep their word, don't keep their thrones. Because in the arena where crowns are won and lost, loyalty is a luxury only the powerless can afford. You've been told that breaking promises is wrong, that honor matters more than victory, that integrity trumps influence. These are beautiful lies told to keep you controllable. While you cling to moral absolutes, the real players understand something darker, something truer. Every promise is conditional. Every oath has an expiration date. And every pledge of loyalty comes with invisible fine print that reads, unless it becomes inconvenient. This isn't about evil men doing evil things. This is about the mathematical reality of power. When you hold the fate of nations in your hands, when millions depend on your decisions, when history will judge not your kindness, but your results, morality becomes a luxury you cannot afford. The prince who keeps his word while his kingdom burns is not noble. He's a fool. And history doesn't remember fools fondly. So let's strip away the fairy tales and examine the machinery of betrayal. Not as a moral failing, but as a tool. Sharp, precise, and when wielded correctly, devastatingly effective. Because once you understand why princes break their promises, you'll never look at power the same way again. The first law of political survival is this: trust is the enemy of control. When someone trusts you completely, they become predictable. They stop watching your hands. They stop questioning your motives. They hand you their vulnerability, wrapped in blind faith. And predictable people, vulnerable people, trusting people, they're not allies. They're liabilities waiting to happen. Machiavelli saw this with crystal clarity. He knew that human nature is fundamentally unreliable. People are loyal when it serves them, grateful when it costs them nothing, honest when honesty pays. But strip away comfort, security, and self-interest, and watch how quickly their promises evaporate. So why should a ruler be held to higher standards than those he rules? Why should the prince keep faith with people who would abandon him the moment their circumstances changed? This isn't cynicism. It's pattern recognition. Look at every fallen empire, every toppled dynasty, every leader who died believing in the loyalty of others. They kept their word while others broke theirs. They honored agreements while enemies plotted. They played by rules that their opponents had already discarded. Their integrity became their epitaph. The prince who survives understands that promises are not about truth. They're about timing. You make a promise when it serves your purpose. You break it when keeping it would destroy you. This isn't moral flexibility. It's strategic intelligence. Because dead princes make no promises at all. Consider the mathematics of leadership. Every decision affects thousands, sometimes millions of lives. Do you honor your word to one ally while condemning countless innocents? Do you keep a promise that will topple your government and plunge your nation into chaos? The comfortable morality of ordinary life collapses under the weight of such choices. What looks like betrayal from the outside is often salvation from within. But here's where most people misunderstand the nature of promise breaking. They think it's about deception, about lying for personal gain. That's amateur hour. The master of statecraft doesn't break promises for pleasure. He breaks them for necessity. And he does it with surgical precision, calculating not just the immediate cost, but the long-term consequences. The art lies not in the breaking, but in the timing. Break a promise too early, and you look capricious, untrustworthy. Break it too late, and it serves no purpose. The skilled prince waits for the perfect moment when breaking his word appears not as betrayal, but as wisdom. When observers nod and say, "He had no choice," that's when promise breaking transforms from liability into asset. This requires a different relationship with truth itself. Most people see promises as fixed points, unchanging commitments that define their character. But power operates in fluid dynamics. What serves you today may destroy you tomorrow. The promise that makes perfect sense in peacetime becomes suicide in war. The alliance that strengthens you in prosperity becomes a chain around your neck in crisis. The prince must think like water, not stone. Stone breaks under pressure. Water adapts, flows around obstacles, finds new paths. When circumstances change, only the flexible survive. And flexibility means that yesterday's sacred vow may become today's abandoned strategy. But this creates a psychological challenge that destroys weaker men. To wield betrayal as a tool, you must first overcome the human need for consistency. You must accept that others will call you hypocrite, turncoat, oathbreaker. You must carry the weight of broken promises without breaking yourself. This is why so few can truly master power. Not because they lack the intelligence to understand these principles, but because they lack the emotional armor to bear their consequences. The prince lives in a state of permanent moral isolation. He makes decisions that others cannot comprehend, bears burdens that others cannot imagine, and accepts judgments that others cannot justify. He breaks his word not because he enjoys it, but because someone must. Someone must make the hard choices. Someone must carry the guilt so that others can sleep peacefully in their ignorance. This isolation breeds a different kind of strength. When you no longer need to be loved, you can focus on being effective. When you stop seeking approval, you start making results. When you accept that history will judge you harshly, you become free to do what history requires. The prince who breaks promises isn't seeking to be understood. He's seeking to be victorious, and victory, not virtue, is the ultimate test of leadership. Because virtue without power is just performance. Good intentions without results are just noise. The ruler who keeps every promise while his kingdom crumbles hasn't preserved his honor. He's preserved his ego while sacrificing his people. This is the terrible mathematics of command. Every kept promise is a resource spent. Every honored agreement is a constraint accepted. Every act of loyalty is a limitation embraced. And in a world where your enemies recognize no such limitations, self-imposed constraints become self-imposed defeats. The wise prince hoards his credibility like ammunition. He doesn't waste it on meaningless gestures or symbolic victories. He saves it for the moments when breaking his word will save his throne, protect his people, or secure his legacy. Because credibility, like any finite resource, must be spent strategically. Most people never face these choices. They live in comfortable obscurity, where their word means something only to themselves. They can afford the luxury of consistency because the stakes of their decisions never rise beyond personal consequences, but climb high enough and the air becomes thin. The choices become impossible. and the price of moral purity becomes the destruction of everything you sought to protect. This is why betrayal becomes a tool in the hands of those who understand power. Not because they are evil, but because they are realistic. Not because they enjoy causing pain, but because they accept the responsibility that others flee from. The prince who breaks his promises doesn't do so lightly. He does so precisely because he understands their weight, but understanding the tool is only half the equation. The other half is knowing when to use it. And history's greatest leaders mastered this timing with ruthless precision. They didn't break promises randomly. They orchestrated betrayals like symphonies, each note calculated for maximum impact. Take Julius Caesar's assassins. Brutus didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray his mentor on a whim. For months, he wrestled with the mathematics of loyalty versus necessity. Caesar had become dictator for life. The Republic was dying. Every day Brutus kept his promise of friendship to Caesar was another day Rome slipped further into tyranny. So he made the calculation. One man's life against the survival of an entire system of government. The irony cuts deep. By betraying Caesar, Brutus thought he was saving Rome. Instead, his act of betrayal triggered civil wars that destroyed the very republic he sought to preserve. This is the cruel arithmetic of broken promises. You can calculate the immediate consequences, but the ripple effects stretch beyond any mortal's ability to predict. Yet, would Brutus have chosen differently, knowing the outcome? Perhaps not. Because the alternative, watching Rome transform into an absolute monarchy while he stood by with clean hands, felt like a betrayal of something larger than personal loyalty. Sometimes you must betray one promise to honor a deeper one. Sometimes you must break faith with individuals to keep faith with principles. This is where most people's understanding of betrayal breaks down. They see it as binary: good versus evil, loyal versus treacherous. But power operates in spectrums, not absolutes. The prince doesn't choose between keeping promises and breaking them. He chooses between competing promises, conflicting loyalties, overlapping obligations. When Constantine embraced Christianity, he didn't just change religions. He shattered every promise he'd made to the old gods, to the traditions that had built Rome, to the ancestors who had died defending the ancient ways. His conversion looked like political calculation to some, divine revelation to others. But to the millions who followed the old faith, it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Yet Constantine's broken promises to the past became kept promises to the future. His betrayal of Roman tradition secured Roman survival. The empire that might have collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions instead found new life in a new faith. One man's apostasy became a civilization's salvation. This is the paradox that haunts every leader who understands power. Your greatest betrayals often become your most necessary acts. Your most painful broken promises frequently save the most lives. The choices that earn you the hatred of contemporaries sometimes earn you the gratitude of history. But the psychological toll remains brutal. Watch any leader who has mastered this tool. Behind their eyes, you'll see something most people never recognize. It's not guilt, though guilt is there. It's not regret, though regret lingers. It's the weight of necessary knowledge. They know things about human nature that innocent people cannot comprehend. They've seen how quickly loyalty dissolves under pressure. They've watched good intentions collapse into catastrophic results. This knowledge changes you at a cellular level. Once you understand that every promise exists within a context, that every oath carries invisible conditions, that every pledge of loyalty comes with unspoken expiration dates. You can never again live in the comfortable world of moral absolutes. You've crossed into territory where right and wrong become questions of timing, degree, and consequence. The amateur breaks promises out of weakness. The professional breaks them out of strength. The amateur betrays because he lacks the courage to honor his commitments. The professional betrays because he has the courage to prioritize larger commitments over smaller ones. Henry VIII didn't annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon because he was lustful or cruel. He broke his most sacred vow because England needed an heir, and Catherine could no longer provide one. The stability of the realm trumped the sanctity of personal promises. His betrayal of one woman secured the succession that would eventually produce Elizabeth, one of England's greatest monarchs. Was Henry's broken promise worth Elizabeth's reign? Was the pain inflicted on Catherine justified by the prosperity that followed? These aren't questions with clean answers. They're the kinds of calculations that separate those who rule from those who are ruled. The ruled have the luxury of moral certainty because their choices affect only themselves. The rulers live in the gray zones where every decision carries consequences beyond their ability to fully grasp. They must act with incomplete information under impossible pressure, knowing that history will judge them by results they cannot control. This creates a different relationship with accountability. The prince who breaks promises doesn't do so to escape responsibility. He does so to accept greater responsibility. He chooses to bear the weight of betrayal so that others don't have to bear the weight of catastrophe. Watch how this plays out in modern politics. Every campaign promise broken generates outrage among voters who believed those promises were sacred commitments. But governing is not campaigning. The realities of office often make campaign promises not just impractical, but dangerous. The candidate who promised tax cuts discovers that cutting taxes would bankrupt essential services. The leader who pledged military withdrawal learns that withdrawal would create humanitarian disasters. Do they keep promises that will cause suffering, or break promises to prevent it? The comfortable answer is that they should have made better promises. But comfort is a luxury reserved for those who never face these choices. In the real world, you must choose between imperfect options with incomplete information under impossible time pressure. The sophisticated prince learns to make promises with built-in flexibility. He commits to outcomes, not methods. He pledges to serve interests, not to follow specific paths. This isn't deception, it's precision. Because the promise to achieve a goal is more valuable than a promise to follow a particular strategy, especially when that strategy proves counterproductive. But even this sophisticated approach has limits. Sometimes circumstances change so dramatically that no amount of verbal gymnastics can bridge the gap between promise and necessity. Sometimes you must simply acknowledge that your word, given in good faith under previous conditions, cannot be honored under current realities without causing greater harm than the breaking itself. These moments reveal character, not through the choice made, but through how the choice is handled. The prince who breaks promises while pretending he hasn't is a coward. The prince who breaks promises while blaming others is a fool. The prince who breaks promises while accepting full responsibility for the consequences is beginning to understand power, because ultimately, betrayal as a tool requires the user to betray himself first. You must abandon the version of yourself that needed to be loved, understood, and approved of by others. You must kill the part of your identity that found comfort in moral simplicity. You must sacrifice the peace of mind that comes from always doing the obviously right thing. This self-betrayal is the price of effectiveness. And it explains why so few people can wield real power successfully. Not because they lack the intelligence to understand these principles, but because they lack the willingness to pay this price. They want to be powerful and pure, effective and innocent, victorious and virtuous. But power doesn't offer such comfortable combinations. It demands choices. And those who make the hardest choices, who break the most necessary promises, who accept the deepest betrayals, they're the ones who shape the world, while others merely inhabit it. This transformation creates leaders who operate beyond the reach of ordinary moral frameworks. They inhabit a realm where traditional ethics become obstacles rather than guides. Watch them navigate crises that would paralyze normal people. They don't hesitate, don't second guess, don't waste time seeking consensus. They calculate, decide, and act. Because hesitation in the face of necessity isn't virtue, it's abdication. The prince who has mastered betrayal as a tool develops what can only be called moral immunity. Not because he lacks conscience, but because his conscience has been recalibrated to serve larger purposes. Where others see broken promises, he sees strategic pivots. Where others see betrayal, he sees resource allocation. Where others see treachery, he sees survival. This recalibration doesn't happen overnight. It's forged through repeated exposure to impossible choices. The first time you break a significant promise, it tears at your soul. The 10th time, it still hurts, but you understand why it's necessary. The 100th time, it becomes as natural as breathing. You've crossed into territory where effectiveness matters more than appearances. Results trump rhetoric, and outcomes justify methods. But here's what separates the master from the amateur. The amateur believes that once you start breaking promises, you can break them indiscriminately. He mistakes tool for license. The master understands that betrayal's power comes from its scarcity. Break too many promises, and you become predictable. Become predictable, and you lose the very advantage that betrayal provides. The truly sophisticated prince maintains what appears to be contradictory behavior. He keeps most promises religiously, while breaking crucial ones strategically. This creates a pattern that others cannot decode. They cannot predict when he will honor agreements and when he will abandon them. This uncertainty becomes a weapon more powerful than any army. Consider how this uncertainty affects his enemies. They cannot plan around his behavior because they cannot anticipate it. Do they trust his offer of alliance or assume it's a trap? Do they believe his threats or dismiss them as bluffs? The prince who has weaponized unpredictability forces others to prepare for multiple scenarios simultaneously, diluting their focus and resources. His allies face similar confusion, but this works to his advantage as well. They cannot take his support for granted because they've seen him withdraw it from others. This keeps them loyal not through affection, but through necessity. They need his favor more than he needs theirs, and this asymmetry of need becomes asymmetry of power. The psychology behind this is brutal in its simplicity. Humans crave certainty. When you deny them certainty about your intentions, they fill the void with assumptions that typically favor you. They assume you're more dangerous than you are, more cunning than you might be, more prepared than you could possibly be. Your reputation grows, not through your actions, but through their imagination. This is why silence becomes as powerful as speech for the master of betrayal. When you break a promise, you don't explain. Explanation implies justification, and justification implies you need their approval. Instead, you act and let others construct their own narratives. Invariably, they create stories that make you seem more formidable than the truth would reveal. The broken promise becomes legend. Your enemies whisper about your ruthlessness. Your allies speak of your pragmatism. Your subjects tell tales of your decisive leadership. None of these narratives may be accurate, but accuracy isn't the goal. Influence is the goal. And influence grows in the fertile soil of uncertainty. But maintaining this mystique requires constant vigilance. One poorly timed betrayal, one obviously petty broken promise, one moment where your motivations become transparent and the entire edifice crumbles. The prince who breaks promises for personal gain, rather than strategic necessity, reveals himself as merely selfish. The leader who betrays allies for trivial advantages shows himself as simply untrustworthy. The difference between strategic betrayal and common treachery lies in the stakes involved. Strategic betrayal serves purposes larger than the betrayer. Common treachery serves only the traitor's immediate needs. History remembers strategic betrayal as leadership under pressure. It condemns common treachery as weakness disguised as cunning. This distinction matters because it determines whether your betrayals strengthen or weaken your position over time. Strategic betrayals, properly executed, increase respect even among those who condemn them morally. They demonstrate that you will sacrifice personal comfort for larger goals. Common betrayals decrease respect universally. They prove that you cannot be trusted even with small matters. The prince must therefore develop exquisite judgment about which promises deserve breaking and which must be honored at all costs. This isn't about moral categories, but about strategic mathematics. Some promises, once broken, cannot be unmade. Some betrayals, once committed, cannot be forgiven. Some trust, once shattered, cannot be rebuilt. The master learns to identify these irreversible moments before committing to them. He asks not whether he can break a particular promise, but whether he can survive the consequences of breaking it. Can his power withstand the backlash? Will his goals be advanced or hindered by this particular betrayal? Does the strategic benefit justify the reputational cost? These calculations become instinctive over time, but they begin as conscious exercises in risk assessment. Every promise becomes a contract with invisible clauses. Every commitment carries embedded escape routes. Every agreement contains unspoken conditions that void it under specified circumstances. This mental framework protects the prince from his own emotions. When someone you've made promises to begins working against your interests, you don't feel betrayed. You feel liberated. Their change in behavior triggers the escape clauses you've mentally installed. You're not breaking faith with them. You're responding to their breach of the implied terms of your agreement. This emotional protection is crucial because effective betrayal requires cold calculation, not hot emotion. Betray in anger and you make mistakes. Betray for revenge and you reveal weakness. Betray from hurt feelings and you appear petty. But betray from strategic necessity and you appear inevitable, like a force of nature responding to changed conditions. The truly masterful prince develops the ability to betray without malice. He breaks promises the way a surgeon makes incisions, with precision and without pleasure. The goal isn't to cause pain, but to achieve necessary outcomes. If pain results, it's an unfortunate side effect, not the intended purpose. This detachment becomes visible to those who watch carefully. They see someone who can end relationships, abandon allies, and reverse positions without apparent emotional turmoil. This calmness in the face of betrayal sends a powerful message. It says that your decisions are based on logic, not emotion. That your commitments are strategic, not sentimental. That your loyalty is earned through continued alignment of interests, not granted through historical association. But this very detachment creates its own vulnerability. People need to believe that their relationships with power have some emotional component. Pure calculation, no matter how effective, eventually generates rebellion. The prince who appears completely cold will eventually face opposition from those who want to matter as individuals, not just as strategic assets. The sophisticated leader therefore learns to simulate warmth while maintaining strategic distance. He expresses regret when breaking promises, even if he feels none. He acknowledges the personal cost of necessary betrayals, even if he considers that cost irrelevant. He performs the emotions that others need to see, while keeping his actual decision-making process isolated from emotional contamination. This performance isn't hypocrisy. It's leadership. Because the followers' need to feel valued as individuals is real, even if the leader cannot afford to honor that need in his decision-making process. The simulation of care serves everyone's interests. Followers feel respected. Leaders maintain operational flexibility. The system continues functioning. Yet even this simulation has limits. Perform emotions too well, and you might begin believing your own performance. Begin believing your own performance, and you lose the very detachment that makes strategic betrayal possible. The prince must therefore maintain constant awareness of the gap between what he displays and what he feels, between the role he plays and the calculations he makes. This constant self-monitoring creates a peculiar form of loneliness. You become isolated not just from others, but from your own emotional responses. You watch yourself make decisions that hurt people you care about, break promises to those who trust you, abandon allies who have served you faithfully. And you do it all while maintaining the facade that these decisions are painful when they might actually feel like simple mathematical solutions to complex problems. So now you see the machinery behind the mask. Every handshake carries a calculation. Every promise contains an expiration date. Every vow of loyalty includes invisible terms and conditions. This isn't moral failure. This is mathematical reality. The prince who refuses to break promises doesn't preserve his honor. He preserves his weakness. And weakness, however noble, changes nothing. Power without flexibility is just elaborate suicide. The question isn't whether you'll face impossible choices. The question is whether you'll have the strength to make them when the moment comes.